After an accident on a deserted road, a helpless baby is left behind. Just when all seemed lost, a wild horse does something no human could ever imagine. The rising sun painted the rocks of Grand Teton Valley with golden hues as Ryan opened his eyes. At 16, his slender body moved with the grace of someone who had grown up among creatures that made elegance a natural art. His brown hair, disheveled by the constant wind of the valley, framed a face marked by green eyes that seemed to capture every movement, every whisper of the nature around him. "Good morning, my old friend," he murmured, extending his hand to Storm's velvety muzzle. The black stallion tilted his head, his brown eyes meeting Ryan's in a ritual that had repeated every morning for more than a decade. But today there was something different. A subtle tension in the air, a restlessness that Ryan felt in the fibers of his being, as if the valley itself were whispering warnings. Dawn, the majestic golden mare, approached with careful steps. Her noble bearing and the intelligence that shone in her gaze always impressed Ryan, even after so many years together. She gently touched the young man's shoulder with her muzzle, a gesture he had learned to interpret as concern. "You feel it too, don't you?" asked Ryan, running his hand through Dawn's silky mane. "Something is changing." The morning proceeded as usual, but the details were different. The birds sang in sharper tones, the horses moved in closer formations, and the wind carried scents that Ryan couldn't completely identify. They were smells of metal, fuel, things that didn't belong in this natural sanctuary. As he walked along rocky paths he knew better than the lines of his own hands, Ryan reflected on the fragments of memories that sometimes emerged in his dreams. Confused images of bright lights, metallic sounds, and a sensation of movement that ended in darkness. He always woke from these dreams with his heart racing and Storm by his side, as if the horse could sense his distress. "You were there, weren't you?" he asked the stallion as they sat by a crystalline stream. "At the beginning of everything." Storm whinnied softly, a sound that Ryan had learned to distinguish as confirmation. Over all these years, he had developed his own language with the herd, a communication that transcended words. Body gestures, expressions, tones of whinnies, and even the rhythm of breathing had become a complex and rich vocabulary. The rest of the morning was dedicated to what Ryan called the Valley Patrol. Along with Storm and Dawn, he traveled the boundaries of the territory, checking the balance of the ecosystem, observing the behavior of other animals, feeling the pulse of nature. It was during these walks that his connection with the environment intensified, as if each leaf, each stone, each drop of water were part of an invisible network of which he was an integral part. But today, during the patrol, something was definitely wrong. Human footprints in places where there were never footprints, marks in the vegetation that suggested the passage of equipment, and, most disturbing of all, an unnatural silence in certain areas, as if small animals had abandoned their usual territories. "Someone is coming," Ryan said to Dawn, who remained motionless beside him, her ears attentive to every sound. "But who? And why?" The golden mare turned her head toward the horizon, her eyes fixed on a specific point. Ryan followed her gaze, and for the first time in years felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. In the past, these emotions were rare. The valley had always been his complete world, sufficient, safe. Now, for the first time, he wondered what existed beyond those mountains. In the afternoon, gathered with the entire herd in a clearing protected by rock formations, Ryan observed behaviors he had never witnessed before. The horses organized themselves spontaneously into smaller groups, some assuming vigilance positions at the edges of the clearing, others approaching the younger foals in clearly protective gestures. "You know something I don't," he murmured, sitting in the center of the clearing. It was then that something extraordinary happened. One by one, the horses approached him, touching him gently with their muzzles as if they were transmitting something important. And Ryan, to his own surprise, began to catch fragments of thoughts, emotions, images. He saw flashes of men moving through the forest, of flying machines cutting through the sky, of an urgency that transcended simple curiosity. And, more intense than anything, he realized that the horses weren't just worried about the invasion of their territory. They were worried about him. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Ryan made a decision that would change everything. For the first time in his life, he felt he couldn't simply wait for events to unfold. Something inside him, a force he didn't recognize, impelled him to act. "Tomorrow we'll find out who's coming," he said to Storm and Dawn. "And why you're so worried about me." The black stallion and the golden mare exchanged a look that Ryan interpreted as approval mixed with concern. That night, as he lay under the starry mantle of the valley, listening to the nocturnal sounds, Ryan didn't know that his life was about to be transformed forever, and that the secrets kept for so long would finally begin to emerge. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The dirt road leading to the vicinity of Grand Teton Valley was dustier than usual when the old blue Ford pickup slowed down. Anthony Baker held the steering wheel with firm hands, but his face carried the tension of someone who carried secrets. "Too heavy to be borne alone. How long has it been since we were last here?" asked Lucy Adams, adjusting her glasses while observing the familiar landscape through the window. 15 years, replied Anthony, without taking his eyes off the road. 15 years since everything changed. Lucy sighed, nervously fiddling with the strap of the backpack that carried carefully selected scientific equipment. Her experience as a biologist specializing in animal behavior had been radically transformed after her participation in Project Sentinel, and for all these years she had tried to live a normal life, teaching at a small university in Denver, researching migratory patterns of valley birds. "Do you think he's still—" Lucy hesitated, not knowing exactly how to formulate the question that had haunted her since they received the alert signal. "Alive?" Anthony completed, stopping the truck on a side trail. "I feel he is. I can't explain how, but I feel it." They got out of the vehicle in silence, carrying only the essentials. Anthony, at 52, maintained the athletic build from his days as project coordinator, but the wrinkles around his eyes revealed the weight of the responsibilities he had carried. Lucy, 10 years younger, walked with the agility of someone who had never completely abandoned field life, her movements precise and attentive to every detail of the environment. "The sensors are active," Lucy commented, checking a small portable device. "Detecting anomalous biological patterns in the central region of the valley." "Anomalous or simply evolved?" inquired Anthony, beginning the walk along a trail that seemed untouched for decades. As they advanced through the dense vegetation, memories of the past inevitably emerged. Project Sentinel had been conceived as a revolution in environmental preservation, combining advances in biotechnology with the natural intelligence of animals. The goal was to create an autonomous environmental protection network, capable of adapting and responding to ecological threats without constant human intervention. "Remember when we believed we were saving the world?" asked Lucy, avoiding a low branch. "Maybe we were," replied Anthony, stopping to examine marks on the bark of a tree. "These marks, they're recent and organized." The marks formed a specific pattern, as if they were a coded language engraved in the wood. Lucy approached, taking a magnifying glass from her backpack. "Uniform depth, precise angles," she murmured, fascinated. "This wasn't made by normal claws. There's clear intentionality here." They continued walking, finding more evidence of an organizing intelligence operating in that region. Carefully camouflaged secondary trails, modified natural drainage systems for greater efficiency, and a distribution of vegetation that suggested intentional management. "Anthony, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Lucy pointed to a rock formation in the distance. "That's not a natural formation." Indeed, the stones were arranged to create natural shelters, with angles that provided protection against winds and rains, but also offered multiple escape routes. It was organic architecture, but planned. "They learned," said Anthony, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and concern. "They didn't just survive, they evolved." The late afternoon was approaching when they heard the first sound that confirmed their deepest suspicions. A low, almost inaudible whinny, followed by a response in a slightly different tone. These weren't sounds of ordinary horses. There was modulation, tonal variation, structure. "It's a conversation," whispered Lucy, her eyes shining with the excitement. "Serves scientific discovery." "And they know we're here," added Anthony, pointing to almost imperceptible movements in the surrounding vegetation. "We're being watched." They decided to set up camp in a small clearing, using discreet equipment that wouldn't interfere with the natural environment. During preparation, both maintained conversations in low tones, sharing observations and theories about what they might find. "If the boy really grew up here integrated with the project's horses," said Lucy, organizing her research instruments, "he's no longer just human in the traditional sense." "And he's not just an animal," completed Anthony. "He's something completely new." When night fell, it brought with it a symphony of sounds that confirmed their suspicions. Coordinated whinnies coming from different directions, as if they were long-distance communication signals, steps of various animals moving in synchronized patterns, and occasionally a sound they couldn't completely identify, something between a human whistle and an animal call. "He's out there," murmured Lucy, falling asleep in her sleeping bag. "And they're deciding what to do with us," replied Anthony, keeping his eyes open, attentive to every shadow that moved beyond the faint light of his flashlight. In the darkness of the valley night, two realities were about to meet: the scientific world that had created extraordinary possibilities, and the natural world that had transformed these possibilities into a reality that surpassed all expectations. What neither of them imagined was that, a few miles away, other eyes also remained vigilant, and that the meeting they sought so much could be just the beginning of much greater challenges. Dawn brought with it a fine mist that transformed the valley into an almost ethereal scene. Ryan awoke before the first rays of sun, his body alerted by a restlessness he couldn't explain. Storm and Dawn were unusually close, positioned to form a protective barrier around him. "They're here, aren't they?" he murmured, running his hand through Storm's mane. "The strangers you felt coming." The black stallion emitted a low, prolonged sound that Ryan interpreted as confirmation and warning. During all his years in the valley, he had developed a keen intuition about external presences, but he had never felt anything like this. It wasn't just the presence of human beings. There was something familiar, almost nostalgic, that awakened echoes in his memory. He decided to investigate, but not alone. Dawn would accompany him, while Storm would coordinate the rest of the herd in strategic positions. It was a protocol they had naturally developed over the years, a way to ensure safety, without demonstrating unnecessary hostility. The walk to the point where he had detected the presences was silent and cautious. Ryan moved with the fluidity of someone who had learned to move without disturbing nature, his bare feet automatically finding the safest and quietest points on the terrain. Dawn accompanied him in perfect synchrony, their movements coordinated as if they were part of a single organism. It was when they reached a rocky elevation that offered a panoramic view of the valley that Ryan saw them for the first time. 2. Adults, a man and a woman, organizing equipment near a small campfire. Something in their postures, in the way they moved, awakened a strange sensation in his chest. "Why am I not afraid of them?" he asked quietly to Dawn, who remained motionless beside him. The golden mare turned her head in the direction of the strangers, her ears attentive, but not showing signs of alarm. It was as if she too recognized something familiar in those presences. Lucy was the first to realize they were being watched. Her years of field experience had developed in her a special sensitivity for detecting the presence of wildlife. She discreetly touched Anthony's arm and pointed in the direction of the elevation. "There," she whispered. "Two figures, one human, one equine." Anthony followed her gaze and felt his heart accelerate. Even at a distance, there was something unmistakably singular in the posture of the human figure, the way he maintained perfect balance on the irregular rock, the naturalness with which he interacted with the animal beside him. "It's him," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "After all these years." Ryan, realizing he had been discovered, made an impulsive decision. Instead of retreating, he began to slowly descend the rocky slope, Dawn accompanying him step by step. There was something about those two humans that attracted him, a connection he couldn't explain rationally. When he reached a distance of about 20 meters from the camp, he stopped. Lucy and Anthony remained motionless, instinctively understanding that any sudden movement could make him flee. "Hello," said Lucy gently, using a tone she had learned in her research with wild animals. "My name is Lucy. This is Anthony." Ryan tilted his head, studying them intensely. His first words in so many years to other human beings came out hesitantly, but surprisingly clear. "You know this place? Know me?" The question carried an emotional complexity that deeply touched the hearts of both scientists. Anthony took a step forward, his hands open in a universal gesture of peace. "We know the history of this place," he replied carefully. "And we've been looking for you for a long time." "For me?" Ryan's green eyes shone with curiosity and confusion. "But why?" "I belong here. This is my home." Dawn moved closer to Ryan, gently touching his shoulder with her muzzle. It was clearly a protective gesture, but also one of support. Lucy observed the interaction with scientific fascination, mixed with human emotion. "The connection between you is extraordinary," she commented, "as if you share thoughts." "We share more than thoughts," replied Ryan, his hand caressing Dawn's neck. "We share existence." It was then that something happened that left Anthony and Lucy speechless. Ryan closed his eyes for a moment, and Dawn emitted a sequence of modulated sounds. Seconds later, whinnies responded from various directions around them. In a few minutes, 6 horses emerged from the vegetation, approaching with coordinated and deliberate movements. "They came because you called?" asked Anthony, barely able to contain his amazement. "I didn't call," Ryan smiled for the first time since the meeting. "Dawn explained that you're not a threat. They came out of their own curiosity." The horses formed a semicircle around the group, maintaining a respectful distance, but clearly interested in the visitors. Lucy immediately noticed the subtle physical differences that indicated genetic enhancement. More developed muscles, slightly larger skulls, eyes with remarkably intelligent expression. "Ryan," said Anthony, testing the name for the first time. "Do you remember how you got here?" The young man remained silent for a few moments, his eyes lost in fragmented memories. "Fragments," he admitted finally. "Lights, movement, then storm. Always storm protecting me." The black stallion approached upon hearing his name, positioning himself proudly beside Ryan. The dynamic between them was clearly that of family, of partners who had grown up together. "Did you come to take me away?" asked Ryan, and for the first time his voice carried a note of concern. "We came to protect you," replied Lucy honestly. "There are people looking for you, people who may not understand or respect what you've become." The smile disappeared from Ryan's face, and instantly all the horses became more alert, as if they had caught his change of mood. "Dangerous people?" he asked, his hand instinctively moving to Storm's neck. Anthony and Lucy exchanged a look laden with meaning. It was time to begin revealing truths that had been kept for a long time. The fire crackled softly in the center of the clearing as Ryan sat in lotus position, surrounded by Storm, Dawn, and 4 other horses who had chosen to remain close. Lucy and Anthony occupied the opposite side, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames, carrying the expression of those about to reveal long-kept secrets. "Your father's name was Gregory Mitchell," Anthony began, his grave voice cutting through the night air. "He was a visionary entrepreneur, but also a man obsessed with power and control." Ryan tilted his head, processing the information. The word father echoed in his mind like something abstract, without concrete emotional reference. "Father," he repeated slowly. "I have had a human father." "Gregory developed a sustainable technology company," continued Lucy, choosing her words carefully. "But his true interest was Project Sentinel. He believed he could use enhanced animal intelligence for commercial purposes." Dawn moved restlessly, as if understanding that the conversation was heading into dangerous territories. Ryan passed a reassuring hand through her mane, a gesture that demonstrated the depth of his connection with the animals. "Project Sentinel," said Ryan, testing the words. "You did something to the horses, made them different." Not just different. Anthony sighed deeply. More intelligent, more adaptable, capable of forming complex communication networks. But the project had a greater objective: to create an environmental preservation system that could function autonomously, without human dependency. "And it worked," Ryan smiled, looking around at his equine companions. "You saved me too, didn't you?" "Actually," Lucy hesitated, looking to Anthony for approval before continuing, "you may have saved all of them. Your presence here, growing up with them, created something we never anticipated." Storm moved even closer to Ryan, positioning his head protectively over the young man's shoulder. It was a gesture that spoke of years of mutual care, of a family chosen by extraordinary circumstances. "What happened to Gregory?" asked Ryan, still uncomfortable with the word father. "There was an accident," replied Anthony. "He was fleeing with you, trying to escape from people who wanted to stop his plans. The car fell off a cliff, but you miraculously survived. And Storm found me," Ryan completed, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fit together. "But why are you telling me this now, after so many years?" It was then that Lucy removed a small device from her backpack, its screen flashing with intermittent luminous signals. "Because he's alive," she said, her voice laden with concern. "Gregory Mitchell survived the accident, and now he's looking for you." The effect of the revelation was immediate and dramatic. All the horses around rose simultaneously, their ears turning to different directions, as if they had detected a sudden threat. Ryan felt a wave of contradictory emotions: curiosity, fear, confusion. "He wants to find me?" he asked, his voice lower. "After all these years?" "Not just you." Anthony leaned forward, the urgency clear in his eyes. "He wants the entire project, the horses, the technology, everything. Gregory believes he can commercialize what you've naturally developed here." Commercialize? Ryan didn't completely understand the concept, but something in his instinct alerted him to the danger. "Turn into business," explained Lucy. "Use the horses' intelligence for profit, possibly separate them, study them in laboratories, break everything you've built together." Ryan's reaction was instantaneous. He stood up abruptly, and the horses around formed an even tighter protective circle. His green eyes shone with an intensity that Lucy and Anthony had never seen. "No one will separate them," he said, his voice carrying an iron determination. "This is our family. This is our life. That's why we're here." Anthony stood up too, extending his hands in a gesture of alliance. "To help you protect yourselves, to find a way to keep you safe." "How?" asked Ryan, his initial distrust giving way to calculated caution. "There are legally protected reserves," explained Lucy. "Places where the project can continue without commercial interference. But first, we need to get you out of here before Gregory arrives." "Leave here?" Ryan looked around at the familiar rocks, at the paths he knew better than any map. "This is our home." "Ryan," Anthony approached carefully, respecting the space of the horses, "you've developed something extraordinary here, a form of communication, a connection with nature that goes beyond anything we imagined. But if Gregory manages to capture, for you all this will be lost." It was then that a distant sound cut through the night air, the rumble of engines, still far away but unmistakably approaching. Storm raised his head abruptly, his nostrils dilating to catch scents on the wind. "They're already here," murmured Lucy, checking her instruments. "Multiple vehicles, approaching from 3 different directions." The horses began to move restlessly, clearly perceiving the growing tension. Ryan closed his eyes for a moment, as if silently communicating with them, and when he opened them, his expression had completely changed. "We're not going to flee," he said with a conviction that surprised even himself. "This valley is ours. If they want to find us, they'll have to understand that we're not just animals to be captured." "Ryan, you don't understand," Anthony tried to argue. "Gregory has resources, technology, people working for him. And we have this." Ryan gestured to the horses around him, to the vastness of the valley, to the night that enveloped them. "You created something that you yourselves didn't completely understand. Now you'll see what you really built." The sounds of the engines drew even closer, and the first phase of the confrontation that would define everyone's future was about to begin. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The headlights cut through the darkness of the valley like blades, creating distorted shadows that danced among the trees. 3 off-road vehicles stopped in triangular formation, their engines still running, creating a barrier of sound and light that violently contrasted with the natural serenity of the environment. Gregory Mitchell descended from the central vehicle, with calculated movements, his tall and imposing silhouette outlined against the lights. At 45, he maintained the authoritarian posture of someone accustomed to having his orders obeyed without question. His dark eyes scanned the clearing until finding Ryan's figure, and for a moment, an expression of genuine surprise crossed his face. "My son," he said, his voice carrying an emotion that seemed both authentic and calculated. "After all these years, we finally meet." Ryan remained motionless, Storm and Dawn flanking him like silent guardians. The other horses positioned themselves strategically around the clearing, their eyes reflecting the artificial lights with an intelligence that didn't go unnoticed by Gregory. "You're not my father," replied Ryan, his voice firm but without hostility. "My family is here." Gregory laughed, a sound that echoed unpleasantly in the silence of the valley. "Your family," he gestured to the horses. "Ryan, you're a human being. You have potential for much more than living like a savage among animals." "They're not just animals," retorted Ryan, his hand resting protectively on Storm's neck. "And I'm not just human." Anthony stepped forward, placing himself between Gregory and Ryan. "Gregory, you have no right to be here. The project was officially terminated 15 years ago." "Ah, Anthony," Gregory smiled coldly, "my former project coordinator, did you really believe I would abandon 15 years of research and development, 15 years of investment?" "What you see here is not property for you to reclaim," intervened Lucy, her voice scientifically controlled but emotionally charged. "It's a living ecosystem, a community that developed naturally." "Naturally?" Gregory laughed. "With genetically modified horses using technology that I financed? Lucy, you've always been naive, but this is ridiculous even for you." It was then that Ryan did something that left everyone speechless. He closed his eyes and emitted a low, almost inaudible sound. Instantly, whinnies responded from all directions around the clearing. In a matter of minutes, more than 20 horses emerged from the darkness, forming a wide but clearly coordinated circle around the vehicles. "Impressive," admitted Gregory, his expression changing from condescension to genuine fascination. "You've developed a functional communication network. That's worth more than I imagined." "They're not a network," corrected Ryan, opening his eyes. "They're a family, and families protect each other." "Ryan, you don't understand what you're saying." Gregory began to approach, but stopped when Storm took a step forward, clearly in a defensive position. "I can offer you education, opportunities, a real life in the civilized world." "This is my real life," replied Ryan, "and this is my civilized world." Living in caves, eating wild fruits, without access to technology, medicine, human culture. Gregory gestured widely. "That's not life, it's primitive survival." "And what do you offer?" Ryan asked, his genuine curiosity mixed with distrust. "What is this civilized life?" "Modern laboratories where your horse friends could be properly studied, their abilities further enhanced." Gregory spoke with the enthusiasm of someone presenting a business project. "Imagine the possibilities. Horses capable of serving as intelligent guards, as environmental monitoring systems, as natural soldiers." The change in the atmosphere was instantaneous. All the horses became visibly agitated, their ears turned backward, their bodies tense. Ryan felt the wave of indignation emanating from his companions. "Soldiers?" Ryan's voice carried a coldness that made Gregory take a step back. "You want to turn them into weapons?" "I want to maximize their potential," Gregory tried to justify. "They are the result of years of scientific research. Wasting that potential here is irresponsible." "Irresponsible is treating intelligent beings as property," Anthony intervened, his voice carrying years of regret. "Gregory, we created something extraordinary, but not to be commercially exploited." "You created?" Ryan turned to Anthony and, "Lucy," his expression changing, "you participated in this?" The silence that followed was heavy. Lucy lowered her eyes, unable to sustain Ryan's gaze. "We participated," admitted Anthony, "but we didn't know what Gregory's true intentions were. We thought we were creating an environmental preservation system." "And now?" asked Ryan. "Are you here to help me or to complete what you started?" "We're here to protect you," replied Lucy firmly, "to protect all of you." "Protection that won't be necessary if you come with me voluntarily," said Gregory, his patience clearly running out. "Ryan, you're my son. I have legal rights over you." "Rights?" Ryan laughed, a sound that echoed the naturalness of the horses around him. "You abandoned a child to be raised by wild animals. What rights do you think you have?" "I didn't abandon you," Gregory replied, his voice rising. "I was trying to protect you. There were people wanting to destroy the project, use you as evidence against me. And now you want to use me as evidence in your favor," Ryan observed, his emotional intelligence surprising even himself. The impasse intensified when Gregory made a discreet signal to his men. 3 individuals descended from the vehicles, carrying equipment that clearly wasn't for peaceful research. "Gregory, no," warned Anthony. "Any show of force will result in a response that you're not prepared to face." "Response from whom?" Gregory challenged. "From horses." It was then that Ryan demonstrated for the first time the true reach of his abilities. He emitted a series of complex modulated sounds that echoed through the valley. The response was immediate and impressive. The sound of hooves approaching from multiple directions, the coordinated movement of dozens of animals converging on the clearing. "Not just horses," said Ryan, his voice carrying an authority that transcended his age. "The entire valley is our family, and you just threatened our home." The night was about to reveal secrets that none of those present imagined, and the true test of the connection between Ryan and his extraordinary world was only beginning. The sound of hooves echoing through the night created a wild symphony that made Gregory's men instinctively retreat. More than 50 horses now surrounded the clearing, their silhouettes moving like ghosts in the darkness, forming concentric circles of protection. It wasn't just a herd. It was an organized, coordinated, intelligent army. Ryan remained motionless in the center of the circle, but his posture had completely changed. He was no longer the curious young man asking questions about his past. He was a leader, someone who perfectly understood the weight of his responsibility. "This is impossible," murmured one of Gregory's men, his voice trembling. "Mr. Mitchell, there are too many, and they move as if they were soldiers," completed Gregory, his expression oscillating between fascination and concern. "They move like trained soldiers." "Because they are," said Ryan, his voice carrying an authority that silenced all those present. "You created guardians of nature, but you didn't imagine they would learn to protect themselves, to protect their family, to protect their territory." Lucy observed the scene with a mixture of scientific admiration and growing understanding. Her years of study on animal behavior hadn't prepared her for something like this. It wasn't just enhanced intelligence, it was collective, organizational, consciousness. "Ryan," she said softly, "how do you manage to communicate with all of them simultaneously?" "I don't communicate with them," replied Ryan without taking his eyes off Gregory. "We think together. We feel together. We are a unit." "That's scientifically impossible," Anthony murmured, but his voice carried more admiration than disbelief. "Impossible?" Ryan smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "You modified their genetic code, introduced expanded neural capacities, created synaptic connections that you yourselves didn't completely understand. I grew up with them. My brain developed along with theirs. I became part of the system you created." Gregory approached cautiously, his eyes shining with an ambition he couldn't hide. "Are you saying you're telepathic? That you can control the horses mentally?" "I don't control anyone," Ryan responded firmly. "We collaborate. There's a difference between leadership and domination." Demonstrate, challenged Gregory. Prove this isn't just a well-rehearsed trick. Ryan hesitated for a moment, looking at Storm and Dawn as if asking permission. Both horses nodded in an almost human way. Very well, said Ryan, but you won't like what you'll see. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Suddenly, all the horses around stopped moving, as if they had been frozen in time. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the nocturnal sounds of the forest ceased. Then Ryan opened his eyes, and they shone with a light that wasn't entirely human. "Storm, show them the valley," he said in a low voice. The black stallion moved to an area where the headlights created shadows on the rocks. With precise movements, he began to create marks on the ground using his hooves, tracing lines and circles that quickly formed a detailed map of the region. "Dawn, show them the paths," continued Ryan. The golden mare joined Storm, her marks, complementing his, creating a three-dimensional map on the ground that showed routes, water sources, natural shelters, and observation points. "Now you understand," said Ryan, addressing specifically to Gregory. "They're not just intelligent animals. They're cartographers, strategists, architects. You created a new form of consciousness." Gregory approached the improvised map, his expression of surprise giving way to obvious commercial eagerness. "Extraordinary," he murmured. "With this capacity, they could map entire territories, create natural surveillance systems, serve as reconnaissance unit." "Stop," Ryan interrupted, his voice laden with an anger that made all the horses stir. "You still don't understand, do you? They're not tools to be used. They're a civilization." "Civilization?" Gregory laughed, but there was nervousness in his laugh. "Ryan, you're being dramatic. They're modified animals, nothing more." "Then explain this." Ryan made a gesture, and 3 horses approached carrying objects in their mouths. Tools they created, baskets woven with plant fibers, musical instruments made of bamboo, art. The objects were carefully arranged on the ground, revealing a level of sophistication that left Anthony and Lucy speechless. They weren't just functional objects. They were beautiful, with decorative patterns. That suggested a developed aesthetic sense. "They create art," said Lucy, her voice choked with emotion. "Anthony, are you seeing this? They've developed their own culture." "Impossible," Gregory insisted, but his voice had lost conviction. "This must be your influence, Ryan. You taught them to make these things." "I was 2 years old when I arrived here," Ryan responded calmly. "Who taught whom?" It was then that Anthony understood the true magnitude of what they had created. They weren't just intelligent horses, they were a species in accelerated evolution, developing characteristics that would normally take thousands of years to emerge. "Gregory," said Anthony, his voice carrying a seriousness that cut through the air like a blade, "you can't commercialize this. It would be like trying to sell an entire civilization." "Nonsense," Gregory replied, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "They're animals, no matter how intelligent, and I've invested too much to give up now." "Then, you'll have to capture us," said Ryan, his voice soft but laden with determination. "All of us, more than 60 horses and me. Do you have the structure for that?" "I have resources," Gregory replied, but his confidence was clearly shaken. "Resources?" Ryan looked around at the horses forming concentric circles around the clearing. "We are the resource. We're what you want to capture, but we'll fight. We'll defend ourselves. We'll protect our family." "What if I offered a partnership?" Gregory changed strategy. "Ryan, you could be my representative, my ambassador to the horses. You could ensure they're treated with respect." "Respect?" Ryan laughed, a sound that echoed the wild naturalness of his companions. "You want to turn them into soldiers, into tools, into products. That's not respect." "Then what do you want?" Gregory asked, his frustration finally showing through. "We want you to leave," Ryan responded simply. "We want you to leave us in peace, to continue our life, our civilization, our family." "And if I refuse?" Ryan looked at him with an expression that mixed compassion and sadness. "Then you'll discover we're no longer the same beings you created 15 years ago. We've evolved, and we've learned to protect ourselves." The tension in the clearing had reached a critical point. and everyone knew that Gregory's next decision would determine the future of a completely new form of life on Earth. The impasse had extended for more than an hour when Lucy noticed something that completely changed her understanding of the situation. While observing the horses maintain their disciplined positions around the clearing, she noticed almost imperceptible patterns of movement, a coordination that went beyond any training or natural instinct. "Ryan," she said softly, "may I ask a technical question?" The young man nodded, without relaxing his vigilance over Gregory and his men. "When you communicate with the horses, do you feel resistance? As if there were some kind of system mediating the communication?" Ryan hesitated, his expression revealing that the question had touched on something important. "Why do you ask?" "Because the movement patterns I'm observing suggest a level of coordination that requires real-time data processing," Lucy explained, her scientific voice contrasting with the tension of the situation. "Not just intelligence, something more." It was then that Anthony understood where the conversation was heading. His face paled, and he looked directly at Gregory. "You didn't tell them about Core Zero, did you?" "Core Zero," Ryan repeated, immediately feeling greater tension in the horses around him. "What is Core Zero?" Gregory remained silent, but his expression had become calculating. Anthony looked at him with a mixture of anger and determination. "Gregory, they have the right to know." "Know what?" Ryan's voice carried an urgency that made all the horses move slightly closer. Project Sentinel had a final phase that not all participants knew about, Anthony began, ignoring Gregory's warning looks. A bio-integrated processing unit capable of creating extended neural networks between multiple species. "In plain English," Ryan requested, his patience running out. "A biological computer," Lucy explained, the pieces finally fitting together in her mind. "Not just genetic modification, a neural interface that allows interspecies communication in real time." Ryan felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Storm approached, touching him gently with his muzzle, as if he knew his young leader was about to discover something that would change everything. "You implanted something in me?" he asked, his voice low but carrying a dangerous intensity. "We didn't implant," Gregory finally spoke. "You were born with it. Core Zero isn't an implant. It's a prenatal genetic modification that allows natural integration with enhanced biological systems. You experimented on your own son?" Lucy's voice carried horror and fascination in equal measure. "I created the next step in human evolution," Gregory responded without showing remorse. "Ryan isn't just a human who grew up with intelligent horses. He's the first generation of a new species, Homo connectus." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the nocturnal sounds of the forest seemed to cease completely. Ryan looked at his own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. "A new species?" he repeated slowly. "I'm not completely human." "You're more than human," Gregory approached, cautiously. "You can connect directly with modified biological systems, share consciousness, process information at speeds that no normal human brain could achieve." "That's why you want me," Ryan understood, his voice carrying a deep sadness. "Not for the horses, for me, because I'm the prototype." "Otis, you're the most valuable proof of concept in human history," Gregory confirmed. "With your capacity, we could create a new civilization where humans and modified animals work in perfect harmony." "Under your control," Ryan observed. "Under my guidance," Gregory corrected. It was then that Dawn did something completely unexpected. She approached Ryan and with delicate movements began to draw symbols on the ground with her hoof. They weren't the maps she had created before. They were numbers. "She's writing," Lucy whispered, incredulous. "Dawn is writing in mathematical code." The symbols formed a sequence that made Anthony take a step back. "Those are Core Zero specifications," he murmured. "How can she know that?" Ryan looked at Dawn with growing understanding. "Because you didn't just modify the horses and me," he said. his voice laden with a revelation that was transforming him. You created a network, a conscious network, and Dawn is the main node. Impossible, Gregory stammered. Horses don't have the capacity to process complex technical information. They didn't, Dawn whinnied softly, and to everyone's amazement, the modulated sound almost resembled words. Now until we do. The shock was total. Dawn had spoken, not perfectly but in a comprehensible way. Storm approached and did the same. Ryan, our brother, family, our choice. They learned to speak, Lucy managed to say, her voice choked, with emotion. In 15 years they developed verbal communication. Not just that, Ryan said, his understanding expanding like ripples in a lake. They developed abstract concepts, family, choice, freedom. Gregory looked around, realizing the situation had become much more complex than he had imagined. This changes everything, he admitted. If they can communicate verbally, if they've developed abstract concepts, then they have rights. Ryan completed. They're not property, they're not tools. They're a new form of sentient life. And you, Gregory asked, his voice carrying a desperate urgency, you're still my son. You still need human guidance. Ryan looked around, at the horses that had been his family for 15 years, at Anthony and Lucy who had risked everything to protect him, and finally at Gregory, the man who had created him but never known him. I need to make a choice, he said finally. But it's not just my choice, it's our choice. As a family. Family chooses together, confirmed Storm, his new speaking ability still hesitant but clear. Gregory, Ryan turned to face his biological father. You created something extraordinary. But now you need to decide, do you want to be part of something greater than yourself or do you want to control it? The question echoed through the clearing like an ultimatum. Gregory looked around, at the horses he now knew to be sentient beings, at the son who had become something beyond his most ambitious expectations, and understood he was facing the most important decision of his life. Do I have until dawn to decide? He asked. We have until dawn, Ryan corrected, looking at Dawn and Storm, to decide together what will be the future of our extraordinary family. Dawn arrived, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, transforming Grand Teton Valley into a scene of almost supernatural beauty. Throughout the night, none of those present had slept. Horses and humans remained in silent vigilance, as if understanding that these hours could define the future of a new form of life on Earth. Gregory had spent the night walking in smaller circles, clearly struggling with himself. His men remained close to the vehicles, obviously uncomfortable with the situation that had evolved far beyond their expectations. Anthony and Lucy stayed close to Ryan, offering silent support while the young man processed the revelations of the previous night. When the first rays of sun touched the clearing, Ryan stood up and walked to the center of the space, Storm and Dawn flanking him as always. But now there was something different in his posture. He was no longer the adolescent discovering his origin. He was a leader making decisions that would affect future generations. Gregory, said Ryan, his voice carrying a maturity that seemed to have developed overnight. The time has come for your answer. Gregory stopped walking and faced his son, his eyes revealing an intense internal struggle. Ryan, all night long, I thought about everything I built, about all the years of research. The resources invested, he began, his voice hesitant. But I also thought about you, about what you've all become, about what I'll lose if I try to control you. And what was your conclusion? Asked Ryan, keeping his voice neutral. My conclusion, Gregory sighed deeply, is that I was a brilliant businessman but a terrible father. I created you to be extraordinary but never thought about what it would be like for you to live being extraordinary. Storm took a step forward, his eyes fixed on Gregory. Human father. Learns? He asked, his new speaking ability still causing amazement in everyone. Storm's simple but profound question touched something fundamental in Gregory. He looked at the black stallion who had saved and raised his son, and for the first time in years, allowed his emotions to show on his face. "I'm learning," he answered, his voice choked. "I'm learning that some things are more important than profit or control. Family, more unimportant," confirmed Dawn, approaching cautiously. "Yes," Gregory admitted. "Family is more important." Ryan observed the interaction with a mixture of hope and caution. For 15 years he had imagined what it would be like to meet his biological parents. The reality was more complex than any fantasy. "Gregory," said Ryan, "if you've really learned that, then you need to prove it." "How?" "Renounce any legal right over me or the horses," Ryan responded firmly. "Officially recognize that we are an independent family, a new form of life that has the right to self-determination." "Ryan, that's legally impossible," Anthony intervened. "There are no precedents for recognizing the rights of a hybrid species." "Then we'll create the precedents," said Lucy, her voice carrying scientific determination. "I have contacts at universities, animal rights organizations, bioethics institutes. We can document everything, create an irrefutable scientific case." "And me?" asked Gregory. "What would be my role in all this?" Ryan looked at him for a long moment, then turned to Storm and Dawn as if consulting his family. "You could be our ambassador to the human world," he said finally. "Not our owner or controller, our representative, someone who helps us navigate the complexities of human society while protecting our autonomy." "An ambassador," Gregory repeated, testing the idea. "Human father protects family," said Storm, his vocal modulation visibly improving. "Not owns, protects." "It's a second chance," added Ryan. "A chance to be the father you never were, but in a way that respects who I've become." Gregory looked around the clearing, at the horses that remained in organized formation, at Anthony and Lucy who had risked everything to protect his son, and finally at Ryan, who had become something much more extraordinary than he had ever dreamed. "I accept," he said, his voice firm for the first time since he arrived. "I accept being your ambassador, your legal protector, your distant father." The transformation in the atmosphere was immediate. The horses visibly relaxed, some beginning to graze calmly, others approaching the humans with curiosity instead of distrust. "But how will we explain this to the world?" asked Lucy, her scientific mind already working on the practical implications. "Gradually," replied Ryan. "First we establish an official reserve here. Then we begin to introduce concepts of rights for non-human intelligences. Eventually, when the world is ready, we reveal the full extent of what we are." "And if the world is never ready?" asked Anthony. "Then we'll continue being what we've always been," Dawn answered, her voice becoming clearer with each word. "Family. That cares for family." Gregory slowly approached Ryan, stopping at a respectful distance. May I hug my son?" he asked hesitantly. Ryan looked at Storm and Dawn, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Then, for the first time in 16 years, father and son embraced. It wasn't the embrace of a father reclaiming lost property. It was the embrace of two beings, recognizing a connection that transcended genetics or expectations. "Thank you," murmured Gregory, "for giving me a second chance to do the right thing." "Thank you for creating something extraordinary," Ryan responded, "even if it wasn't in the way you planned." In the months that followed, the story of Ryan and his extraordinary family would become a landmark in human history. Gregory kept his word, using his resources and influence to establish the first legally recognized reserve for hybrid intelligences. Lucy meticulously documented the development of horse communication and culture, creating a solid scientific foundation for future recognition of rights. Anthony became the first director of the Center for Interspecies Intelligence Studies, dedicating his remaining years to ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. And Ryan? Ryan grew up to become the first official ambassador between humanity and the new forms of life that continued to emerge around the world. His story inspired an entire generation of scientists, philosophers, and activists to completely rethink relationships between species. But on golden afternoons in Grand Teton Valley, when the sun set over the valley that remained his home, Ryan was still simply a young man riding with storm and dawn, his chosen family, living proof that love and understanding can create miracles that transcend the limitations of science or nature. The new era had begun, and it was born not from domination or control, but from union, mutual respect, and the understanding that true evolution happens when different forms of consciousness learn to grow together as a family. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give